Well, obviously Rod Thorne made a good selection at that time. But I would argue and say, well, wouldn't it be more of a genius if Rod Thorne had a lower pick and essentially traded some really important players in order to get the third pick just to draft Jordan? Right? I mean, that's truly making a bet on that. Well, that's what Jerry West did. If you remember in that summer, the Lakers had lost, and the Lakers weren't happy. Shaq, was
threatening to leave.
Well, no, Shaq wasn't a Laker yet at that time. He was still with Orlando Magic. And if you remember, at that particular point, I can tell you right now, Jerry West got very, very little sleep. Jerry West is naturally anxiety-ridden, but that summer was probably the worst summer of his life because he needed to remake the Lakers at that time. And he had a lot of things that he needed to do. And one thing that he wanted to do is he wanted to get a center. And so at that time, the question was, could we afford to go out there and get Shaquille? And there were other people who said, well, we don't need to get Shaquille. We can't. The Lakers can't really afford him. Maybe we get somebody like Dikembe Mutombo, right? A good defender. And what happened was that Jerry West just said, I'm just going to try to get the best player, period. And if you remember, he dumped all these players in salary cap moves. So Anthony Peeler, who was a very good player at the time, he just dumped him, because he needed to free up salary for that. And then at the same time, he made a deal with Charlotte at that time, the Hornets. They're the Bobcats now, but they're the Hornets at that time. And he said, hey, we want your draft pick. And if you remember, their draft pick was a little bit lower down the line. And Bob Bass, who was the general manager at that time, said, okay, so who do you want us to take? And Jerry says, of course I can't tell you that because the pick is conditional, right? Because we are going to tell the NBA who we want, and if he's there, we'll select him, and we'll trade. So Bob asked, who are you going to trade? At that time, Jerry West went up to the plate, and because it was a high draft pick, he knew how to trade somebody of value. So he traded, and in the NBA, there are really only two positions of specialization. And the two positions of specialization, of course, are point guard and center, essentially, right? And so he stepped up and he said, I'm going to trade you my center. And his center at that time was a young center who had already proven he could play in the NBA. So that's a very valuable commodity. So he said, I'll trade you Vlade Divac for that draft pick. And so Bob Bass goes, fantastic, I'll take Vlade Divac for that. So when draft day came around and came down to Charlotte, and of course, as soon as it got to Charlotte, Bob Bass calls up Jerry West and says, okay, is your player there? Because obviously he wants the player to be there. So he could get Vlade Divac.
So he already knew that, Jerry West already knew that he wants Kobe Bryant at that time.
And Jerry West already knew he wanted Kobe Bryant.
And nobody in the league were looking at Kobe Bryant, only Jerry West?
Well, you have to remember historical context. Historical context shows that, yes, there have been high school players that were selected high in the draft. If you remember, those high school players were all bigs. All right, they're all very tall front court players like Kevin Garnett and so forth.
Oh, that's
Never had a high school backcourt player been drafted that high.
That's interesting. We need to take a really quick break. When we come back, continue our conversation because this is really
great stories.
We'll be right back.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Community Roundtable. I'm your host, Marissa Wall, with my co-host, Henry Huang. And today is very special because in the studio we have Mr. Gino Kwok, the first Chinese-American NBA team owner. And now right before the break, Gino was telling us about a story about Kobe Bryant in the summer of 1996. Can you finish telling us about that?
Yeah, so what happened was that a lot of people in the media, as well as the NBA, were questioning why did the Lakers send their starting center? And as you recall, Jabbar had already retired, so this was it. They sent a very, very good player, and even today they'll tell you that Vlade Divac is one of the greatest passing centers, certainly of the last 15, 20 years. But why did they do that, for a kid, a guard from Lower Merion, Pennsylvania? And I asked that question to Jerry West, in a private moment. And he confided in me, and he said that, Gino, you know that we put all of our players to a test. So what happens is they do a private workout, and nobody else is there. It's just representatives of the team. And every team's private workout is like their Coca-Cola formula. They're not going to tell anybody what they look at.
Right.
And he told me, he goes, Gino, when we put him through our workout, which you've seen, I said, yeah, I've seen it. Of course, the workout is different depending on what position you play.
Right.
But he goes, Gino, when we put him through our workout, he scored the highest ever in our workout. And that's why we drafted him.
Oh. For a fresh-faced player.
For a rookie
Right.
to go ahead and do the private workout, he said he got the highest score ever in the history of their test.
And Kobe has gone through other workouts before too, right? For other teams.
Of course, what happens is in the NBA, either you go through the pre-draft camp, or if you think you're so good, you don't want to go through the pre-draft camp because you think that what's there to gain? Everybody really likes me and so forth. There's only anything to lose. But everybody always goes through a private workout, especially for the team that you hope is going to draft you at a high position. So at that time, nobody knew where Kobe would go. I mean, people would say, yeah, he would go in the first round, but the first round is still a lot of teams. So the Lakers just went out there and worked him out. And when they saw him, they never told anybody what they thought of Kobe Bryant. They didn't even tell Kobe Bryant. They didn't even tell Joe Jellybean Bryant, his father. But they just obviously were amazingly impressed, held it close to their vest. And, of course, history shows that Jerry West that summer went out there and made that deal. And it's an amazing deal. That deal remade the Lakers because in one fell swoop he got Shaq and he got Kobe.
So with your inner working with the NBA and so forth, would you say that Jerry West is a genius because he foresaw that Kobe could be this, once a lifetime player?
Certainly.
Because I just asked you because Kobe went through a lot of workout with other teams. Right, but only Jerry West there.
Right, he knew.
That you spoke to him and told you at that moment he knew Kobe Bryant was the player that he wanted it.
Well, as I mentioned before with the Rod Thorne example, when he drafted Michael Jordan, number 3, well, you have to remember that year when he drafted Jordan 3, Jordan was actually given the honor of the College Basketball Player of the Year. So Jordan was already an outstanding player. And so when Thorne drafted him, of course that was a great pick. But that's who he drafted. Unlike Jerry West, because Jerry West essentially risked everything to move up to draft him. And so certainly Jerry West, what he did at that time can only be seen as one of the great manifestations of basketball genius in the history of the draft.
Right. Well, what does today, this is something I want to talk about on the show before we run out of time. You brought us today your NBA championship ring.
Yes, please tell us about that.
Well, on the ring, obviously, this ring is a product of today's contemporary environment of bling bling and so forth.
Oh, yes.
and so as I used to talk to the older Laker players who have won championships in the 80s, this ring is like the equivalent of every ring that they have ever had, in terms of weight, because they didn't have it at that time. But these rings here are very symbolic. So, for example, if you take a look at this commemorates the Lakers' triangle offense. So if you take a look here, there's a triangle in the middle with a purple amethyst.